So, do you know what type of crier you are?
I read the article.
You read the article. Good. Do you remember which type you were? Did you do the quiz?
I did do the quiz. I think I was all over the place. I think I'm empathetic, but I'm also, I was not much of a, no. It was a fun quiz.
Clearly, we do the same thing on Saturday mornings, because in the New York Times this week, there was this wonderful set of articles about crying. And part of it was a quiz where you get to figure out what type of crier you are. I did the quiz also. Apparently, I'm an attachment crier and a societal crier. So the four types that they named in this quiz in the New York Times, attachment criers develop deep and trusting relationships, and those strong connections are what move them to emotional weeping. And then societal criers see what's going on in the big picture. We're invested in our groups and our communities, and when stuff's going wrong there, then that's when we turn on the waterworks. Compassionate criers show sensitivity towards people and emotions, and especially misfortune and suffering. And finally, sentimental criers. This one didn't come up on my quiz, but I feel like I totally have this. We're the ones that, like, you get to end of that Hallmark movie and you hit the happily ever after, and you're just like, oh, it's just so great, you know. Anyway, so says the New York Times. Now, I also learned something really interesting, because there was a companion article that went with this quiz called Why Humans Cry. And did anyone know that human beings are in fact the only species that sheds tears because of our emotions? See, I didn't know that either. I just learned this yesterday. What they said is that in fact lots of mammals, including babies, scream or shriek or yell, or you know how babies are, you know, that means feed me, right? Or change my diaper, or whatever. They vocalize in order to express what's going on with them. And it's an important survival skill, because that's how you get what you need from your parents, which is what mammals need to survive. But apparently, neither babies or bats shed tears when they're doing this. They just don't. But human beings, as we age, we shift from that screaming to get our needs met to shedding tears over things that make us emotional. And that's when the waterworks start to come on. I mean, think about it. You can see it like that little toddler face. It's all scrunched up, and the tears are coming out because they're so sad because someone knocked over their tower of blocks.
Yeah.
Right? That's kind of how it happens. Little by little, as we grow up, we cry less because of things like hunger or discomfort, and more because of feelings of sadness, grief, or joy. One of the anthropologists described it this way. It's a survival skill, because if predators are lurking and we're shrieking and saying, I'm afraid, that's going to make us more vulnerable, right? But if we have these deep connections between one another and we can read it through the way that we're shedding tears, that's an adaptation that helps us to survive as a species. So, my takeaway from this, it's all right to cry. It's important to cry. And tears are something that connect every last one of us as people. I mean, look at those categories that they listed in the quiz: attachment, compassion, sentiment, and society. They tell me that whatever it is that we are feeling, crying is how we share those burdens that we're carrying with one another. It's how we find commonality in these things, how we fix them together, when otherwise they would feel overwhelming if we had to face them in isolation. So, given all that I just learned yesterday, is it surprising that crying is something that connects us to God too? There is, in fact, if you look at the Bible, a long and deep tradition there about crying out to God. So, you know what? It must be okay. It must be fine. And I know sometimes you think, oh, that's just me whining to God and being ungrateful. But it is, in fact, a form of prayer. This week's readings were full of things that are worth crying over. And there's special Bible words, because we like to have special Bible words for some of these genres of crying. Words like lament or apocalypse. But really, it's just all of the ways that people cry out to God when things are not going the way they should be for us, either as individuals or in our wider communities or in the world as a whole. When things are bad, God feels like God is absent, right? Where are you, God? What's going on? And we cry out because we are seeking to know where is God and how are you going to respond? How are you going to fix this, God? Because I feel alone in it. So let's start with Hannah. Now, Hannah in this reading is expressing deep, deep lament. I mean, her grief is something that I think many of us can relate to, the frustrated desire to conceive and have a child. Now, she is not getting the most empathetic support from the people around her. I mean, Peninnah, who is Elkanah's other wife, is pretty much making fun of her. Horrible. But her husband, he's apparently not a compassionate crier because he's pretty freaked out by her tears too. He doesn't understand the depth of her despair, or maybe he understands it, but he doesn't quite know how to express it with her. So instead he's just like, cheer up, aren't I enough for you? Way to make it about him, right? But then there's that priest in the temple, because he looks at her and he thinks, oh, she's drunk. She's drunk. I mean, I am guessing, is more of a societal crier himself than he is an empathetic one. So the one thing that Hannah trusts is that God will listen to her tears. Even though it also feels like God might have abandoned her, she insists God will hear her and God will respond. Now, in the Bible, lament comes from a place of deep, deep trust. The trust and the faith that God has responded to our tears in the past, and God will do it again. I mean, you can hear it all over the Psalms. They start by listing out all the different ways that God has. God got us out of Egypt, and God gave us manna in the wilderness. God did it before. We know that's who God is. So Hannah's song, which we read together, that canticle in the place of the psalm, is kind of the full circle of that whole cycle. Those are her tears of joy after she's given birth to Samuel finally. But if you also look at what she's saying, it's basically, I knew it. I knew that you would hear me, God, because that's exactly who you are. The God who hears our cries and acts by turning things around. All those tears that brought Hannah closer to God, her tears are part of her seasoning agency in this situation that just feels like it's completely out of her control. Her tears reconnect her to hope in God, her faith, the thing that supports her most deeply, especially when things are feeling so dark that she can barely even eat. Now, our passage from Mark's Gospel is another form of crying out to God when things keep seeming like they're darker and darker. It's called Little Apocalypse, the Little Apocalypse. Now, if you listen to the kind of stuff that Jesus is talking about here, war, an earthquake, famine, untrustworthy leaders, and the destruction of monuments and institutions that feel like they're fundamental to our society and our connection with God and each other, that's big stuff. It's the kind of cataclysmic change that takes place on a whole societal level, and it's frightening and it's overwhelming, and it brings with it all kinds of loss and fear and grief. Now, we know that the people that would have heard Jesus talking about these kinds of things were living in a time of rising instability. The ancient Near East at that time is going through a lot of political shifts, and people are moving around all over the place, and communities are changing all around them. The other thing that we are pretty sure about is that the people to whom Mark was writing about a generation after Jesus was living were living through, or had just lived through, the brutal suppression by Rome of a Jewish rebellion. And that included the actual destruction of the temple in Jerusalem. So they lived it. They were in the middle of it. So here's the thing about apocalypse in the Bible. Because just looking at it on the surface, it may seem like a cry of despair. I mean, how could things get any darker than that kind of stuff? In fact, they're writing about it as if it feels like this is the end of all things. Where are you, God, in the midst of this? But apocalypse is actually an expression of hope. Because it's saying it may feel like everything is falling apart and God is missing in action, but you know what? We know you're still there, God. And we know that you have a plan. You have a plan even though it feels like it's completely hidden from us. We can't figure it out, but we trust. We have faith, God, that you have this plan, and please reveal it to us. In fact, the word apocalypse actually translates more or less into the word reveal. Reveal what's hidden. Reveal your presence, God, and reveal your plan for us, because we trust that this is the case. So all of that stuff that Jesus talks about as signs, the violence and the political conflict, the turmoil and the natural disasters, that stuff happens a lot in human terms. We experience it all the time, generation after generation. So fundamentally, the genre of apocalypse, it's a story about human resilience. God, draw near to us so that we can get through this once again. I think to put it roughly, it's an appeal to God's societal crier side. Because I believe God gets all types of crying. In fact, in some way, Mark's gospel, which I don't know if you realize this, but this is the last week that we're going to hear Mark's gospel. We've just come to the end of year B. We started roughly a year ago, and we have worked through most of it in this 12-month time. But Mark's gospel as a whole is like a giant answer to the question, where are you, God? Especially in this time of turmoil where everything's changing around his audience. And Mark's gospel has an answer. God is right here with us in the person of Jesus. In fact, Mark tells it to us in the very first sentence of the gospel. This is the good news of God in Jesus, God's Son. So God doesn't need to be in the temple anymore. God is with us in the person of Jesus. So, what should we do when everything seems like it's falling apart and all we can do is cry it out? Well, we get to remember God loves us. God's with us in Jesus. It might feel like it's the end, but it's not. I kind of like how our letter to the Hebrew puts it today, said, let us approach God with a true heart in full assurance of faith. We know that God will be there for us when we approach. And let us hold fast to our hope without wavering. We know that you'll be there for us again, God, because God is faithful. And then what do? Let us provoke one another. We gather to provoke one another to all cry out and share in this faith, and then to go forth and do deeds of love and caring. Not neglecting, to come together. We need each other. That's it. That's all we can do. So you know what? We're living through difficult times. We live through difficult times all the time. It could be personal, it could be around us, it could be in the wider world. But no matter what's going on, and no matter how it feels, God is not absent. Keep gathering, keep sharing that hope and that faith, and guess what? Keep on crying. Keep on crying. I don't know if any of you remember an old TV show from the 70s called Free to Be You and Me?
Mm-mm. What?
Free to Be You and Me?
Never heard of it.
All right, I'll have to explain it. It was Marlo Thomas. Anyway, it was a fundamental part of my childhood, and it had a lot of great songs. It was for kids. It was special. It was like an after-school special. But one of the things that always stands out in my head is there was this giant football player, Rosie Greer.
Oh.
David said he played for the Los Angeles Rams. Anyway, he was a huge guy, and his part in this show was to sing a song called "It's All Right to Cry." Because it might make you feel better. Look, it makes me tear up just thinking about this song. It's all right to cry. It might make you feel get better. I feel like that's the fundamental message of what we're being told today. Not only is it all right to cry, not only is it something that we uniquely share as human beings, but it is all right to cry out to God. It's how we connect with God. It might make us feel better, and fundamentally, it is an act of faith, hope, and prayer.